Hola, hola, amiga. In this Viva la Mami Spotlight episode, we welcome Magaly Cordero-Dietz. She is a musician, educator, entrepreneur, mother, and owner of Pop-Up Music School. As a daughter of Afro-Dominican and Cuban immigrants, Magaly is passionate about sharing the music of her heritage with her students. In addition to Pop-Up Music School, she currently leads the choral music program at Chicago's St. Procopius School and is the conductor of Pro Musica Youth Chorus Melody Makers Ensemble. In addition, she has been performing classical music throughout the Midwest for over 15 years and is a proud member of the Chicago Symphony Chorus. Magaly holds a bachelor's degree in music from Northwestern University and a master's degree in vocal performance from Roosevelt University's Chicago College of Performing Arts. She lives with her husband and two beautiful children in Oak Park, Illinois. Join us as we explore her personal journey as an Afro-Latina and get inspired by her passion for combining cultural education with music. We also dive into Magaly's innovative approach to teaching music and how she's making an impact in the lives of children by incorporating Latin and Caribbean rhythms into her lessons. Furthermore, Magaly shares how she celebrates and maintains the rich cultural heritage of Latin America and the Caribbean through music. She emphasizes that the music platform is not just a means of education, but also a deeply personal journey of exploring her roots and identity. Magaly speaks from the heart, and her work truly shows it as I've seen her perform and teach through Pop-Up Music School. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I did. So here's my interview with Magaly Cordero-Dietz. Welcome to the Viva la Mami podcast. I am your host, Jessica Cuevas. I am a mother of two on a mission to help redefine the meaning of motherhood as a modern Latina mom. Motherhood can be a complex journey, interwoven in two identities that often make us feel ni de aquí ni de allá. Viva la Mami is committed to providing you with knowledge, tools, and support to navigate the challenges and triumphs of motherhood as Latina moms. On the show, we'll be discussing culturally relevant topics that will help inform and empower you in whichever season you are in on your motherhood journey. We'll be joined by Latina moms, experts and professionals who can offer advice, practical tips, relatable stories, and honest conversations. So bring your cafecito as I invite you to be a part of this space as we create comunidad about the exciting and challenging parts of being a mommy. Ahora, vámonos. Hola, hola, Magaly. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jessica. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate everything that you're doing to la comunidad of little bilingual kids, but also just like you have such an amazing track record of being a musician, an educator, an entrepreneur, which we will delve in a little bit more about that. But first, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My mother's Dominican and my father's Cuban. So I am 100% Caribbean. I grew up in Orlando, Florida. I was born in Miami, but grew up in Orlando. And my parents actually separated when I was about 7, and I never saw my father after that. So I was raised primarily by a single mom. And I also have 2 sisters. So we're a house full of women, 100%. And we actually have a family motto: no somos machos, pero somos muchas. And that's a motto that we use to this day. My childhood was happy, but definitely rough. We didn't have a lot of money. We were quite poor. But my mom is amazing. She worked really hard. She provided for us. We had our own home. And we were lucky to have a really good, stable education in the Orlando public school system. And from there, I was able to come to Chicago and attend Northwestern University. And I've stayed in Chicago since then. I'm a Midwesterner now. I worked a couple years after college and then went back to grad school and met my husband, who's from the area, from Oak Park. And we have been here ever since. I live in Oak Park with my husband and two beautiful kids.
You are a classically trained musician, which
Yes.
you have such a beautiful voice. I every time when I listen to you, I'm just like, you take me somewhere else.
Oh, that's so
Yeah, yeah. And you are an educator, entrepreneur, and a mama as well, which it's just so amazing. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your music journey and your music background and your inspiration for creating Pop-Up Music School?
Sure thing. So I went to college thinking I was pre-med. I had always sung in choirs. I was a choir nerd in Florida, and there's actually a very strong music education system in Florida. So I had a good, strong music background. And when I went to Northwestern, I knew I wanted to be in a choir. I was going to audition for a choir, but really thought I was going to be pre-med. But then I joined the choir. I auditioned and got into the choir where a lot of the underclassmen voice majors were in. And they were talking about their opera program. And I'm like, what is this? This is amazing. I knew you could be a music major, but didn't think I could do it. It just wasn't part of my consciousness when I was 17. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to transfer. And so this starts this really nonlinear education I had. So at Northwestern, the music program is very selective. It's really hard to get into, especially as transfers. They won't even let you audition because there aren't any spots. So freshman year, I wanted to audition. They wouldn't let me freshman year or sophomore year because there were so many students in that program already. But what I decided to do was to register for music classes, see if I could sneak in. So the registration system was all electronic at that point. I was able to sneak in and register for the basic music classes. So like music theory and ear training, while I was also taking my major courses. So I switched to an English major at the time. I needed to graduate in 4 years because financial aid is only guaranteed for 4 years at Northwestern. It's a very expensive school.
Yes.
So I was taking my English major classes, sneaking into my music classes. And then at the end of my junior year, they said, you know what? There's a spot available. Go ahead and audition, and we'll see what happens from there. I auditioned my junior year, end of junior year, and I got in. And because I took those music classes early on, I was able to finish the music major in 4 years. So it was just kind of a whirlwind ride undergrad was. And I ended up with an English minor as well. And I feel like that's important to tell because there's something in me that has a story to tell, whether it's through music or through writing or through reading. There's something I feel like I have to share. There's a story I have to share. From there, I decided to work before I went to grad school. And I taught Spanish to little kiddos. And I decided to change jobs because it was really harsh on my voice. And I started working at Northwestern's medical school in the rheumatology department. So that will be really interesting in a few years. I'll tell a little bit about my lupus journey in a little bit. But because I did work in rheumatology, I saw the signs, the symptoms I had, and was able to figure out that I had lupus a few years after that. And then I also, working within the rheumatology department, I had some clinical experience. I got to interact with patients, and really, it just was really a really great experience, and kind of had me thinking about, oh, maybe med school might be in the future at some point. But I decided to go to grad school and got my master's in vocal performance. So the majority of my performance today is operatic, choral. I'm a member of the Chicago Symphony Chorus, which is an organization I'm really proud to be a part of. So we perform with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra whenever they have a big choral work like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or any piece that has a big choir in it. In terms of Pop-Up Music School, it's an interesting journey. So in 2019, I had a friend who owned a preschool in Oak Park, and she was just trying to look for some additional activities for her kiddos. And she said, would you ever do a early childhood music class? And I said, sure. And I decided to start teaching there. And the theme of her preschool was really introducing kids to cultures from all around the world. So I catered my classes to that niche in her business. So I taught music from all over Europe, Latin America, and so on. And then when the pandemic hit, all my singing dried up. Singing was a super spreader, or was believed to be a super spreader of coronavirus. And it was like the rug was pulled out from under me. My livelihood was gone. I didn't know when I could sing again. So I decided to pursue teaching a little more and started expanding on pop-up music school. And then at that point, I decided to focus on the music of Latin America, which I felt I had more experience and more knowledge and passion about. I do also have a side story. So I'm not going to name him. He's a very famous conductor, and he was the music director at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And once he had a rehearsal with the chorus, and he was talking about how Italian culture is the best in the world. I'm paraphrasing here, but I was so saddened to hear that. And I should back up and say that I love classical music. It's a passion of mine. I think there's immense beauty in Italian music, classical music, European-based music, but you can't say it's the best in the world. There are so many beautiful and worthy musical traditions from all over the world. And when I heard that, I was like, you know what? Our kids deserve better. They deserve to learn about all music. Everything is beautiful, everything is valuable. And at that point, I think it was maybe 2021 that I really thought, I really need to spread pop-up music school and really share the beauty of Latin American music. And like I was saying, my musical training is classical, pretty much 100%, but I grew up listening to salsa, merengue, cumbia, Selena, Luis Miguel, everything. As my mom's cleaning the house, we're listening to all that. My mom's dancing in the living room. And I really feel that the folk and traditional music of Latin America deserves a spot in our music curriculum from a very early age. I really feel really strong and passionate about it. So that's really my main mission with Pop-Up Music School, is to really expose the really little ones, the infants, to this beautiful music, and Latino and non-Latino alike. So for Latino kids, I want them to experience this pride of, wow, this is the music of my people. Yes. But also non-Latinos, they really appreciate it as well. And I've gotten some really beautiful feedback from a lot of non-Latino parents and grandparents who are like, wow, I'm really glad you're doing this. My grandchildren really enjoy this music. Yes. So that's kind of been the fire under me that to really inspire me to continue my mission at Pop-Up Music School.
Yes. Oh, I love it. And you performed in my son Dee's birthday.
Yes.
And he loves music. And I just love that there was this instant connection of just like how you literally walk kids to this like journey of like Latin American and Caribbean countries. And you literally explain, just like the different rhythms, the instruments, and we all enjoyed you being there for his birthday. He loves music, and I can already see that. I was also kind of classically trained in mostly high school and college, but I didn't continue on. I used to play the violin. And so there is beauty within the fine arts and just how you can literally express yourself through music. It is a different language. And I am all for that. I think that oftentimes people don't really think that that is a profession necessarily, that it is risky. With me being in college admissions and in higher education, whenever I worked with students who had an interest in the fine arts, their parents were usually like very reluctant. They wanted them to pursue engineering or, law school, medical school, something that is more guaranteed. But yes. What I find interesting for you, though, is that you found a different way, to utilize your expertise, especially how the pandemic essentially influenced you to consider a different venture, but still you hold that passion and you still allow yourself to educate people through music and history and just the beauty that there is within our Latin American culture.
It's definitely very scary when you go into the arts, whether it's performing arts or fine arts like painting or drawing, because it is really hard to make a living. And we were always told in school to be open to creating your own opportunities. And I really took that to heart. And my mom, she was very nice when I was in college and I told her I wanted to switch majors, and she kept her mouth shut. She said she would support me. But after the fact, like recently, she's like, I was so scared when you told me that. I really didn't know what your life was going to be like if you're going to be singing on the street somewhere. Mm-hmm. But I'm really glad she was supportive. And I think if you are open to being flexible, I'm not singing on the big opera stages, but music is in my life every single day, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. So my recommendation for any young person pursuing the arts is just be open, be flexible. Your life may not be what you expect it to be, but as long as your art is in your life, that's what really matters. And you can make a living. You may not be a millionaire, but you can have a good, stable living for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think that can validate a lot of concerns that some mamas may have towards their kids. So yes. Yeah. Well, as far as with teaching children these varied sounds of Latin America, how do you manifest that through your identity as an Afro-Latina?
In my classes, it's really important for me to highlight the African influences in Latin America. And it's really interesting because I feel that a lot of Latinos, if they're not from a country like the Dominican Republic, the Caribbean countries, or Venezuela or Colombia that has a large African descendant population, a lot of Latinos are surprised by the influence of Africa in pretty much all of Latin America. Mm-hmm. It surprises me to this day. The slave trade went through the vast majority of Latin America. And it's important for me as an Afro-Latina to share where those African elements are found, even in genres where you don't necessarily expect it. So, for example, Argentina, you don't really think about it as being a population or a country that has a large African influence, but there are articles written about the African influences of tango, that they're very much present in tango. It's kind of controversial, but it is an interesting discussion that is being made about that genre in a country that is seen as largely European descendants. Mm-hmm. In so many other countries in Latin America, that African influence is pretty clear, pretty overt because of the large African descendant population, but it really is present in so many of our countries. And I feel that it should be celebrated and respected, and our little ones should be aware of that from the very beginning, from very early age.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know that about tango, so I'm gonna do some research too. Uh-huh. Yes, and people, even for mariachi, there has been studies, at least that I've read, that there was some African influence within mariachi as well. Obviously, it's more European, but
sure.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. And so in terms of you growing up, having this identity as an Afro-Latina, growing up in Orlando and then moving to Chicago, can you kind of explain us your sort of journey with your identity, but also with you kind of establishing yourself in a different community than where you grew up?
Yeah, sure thing. I have a funny story in Orlando. So a lot of people, I think, when they think of Florida, they think of the large Cuban population, but that's mainly South Florida. In Orlando, the larger Hispanic community is Puerto Rican. There's a lot of different types of Latinos. There's a big Caribbean presence, a lot of Venezolanos, Panameños, but the largest group is Puerto Rican. So much so that growing up, I was always asked, what are you? Are you Puerto Rican or are you Black? So Puerto Rican was the term used instead of Latino. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking, I don't know I'm not Puerto Rican and I'm Black, but I'm more than Black, quote unquote, I felt like the term Black didn't always include my Latinidad. And growing up, I never heard the term Afro-Latina. I feel like that's a fairly recent term that's being used today. So growing up, there was always a strong Caribbean presence. I always felt that I saw others like me, a lot of Afro Latinos, a lot of Caribbeans. And then moving to Chicago was quite a different experience. And I know that there is a large Puerto Rican population, but I've happened to really become a part of the Mexican American community here. My church job is in a large Mexican American parish, and my kids go to a Catholic school in Pilsen. So predominantly Mexican American community, and I've learned to love it. It's almost a part of me now. I hope they accept me too. I think that I am, but
Yes.
my family and I, we've adopted a lot of the Mexican traditions. We always have an ofrenda for Dia de los Muertos now. We celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's just an additional part of me. And I should also add that growing up, a lot of the Spanish television we watched was Mexican. We watched Univision, which had a lot of shows from Televisa from Mexico. And so I feel like there was always this knowledge of Mexican culture, even though I wasn't Mexican. So it was fairly easy for me to kind of come into this community that wasn't necessarily my own, and feel like I understood some aspects of it and felt welcome. So that was fairly smooth for me. I will say that there are times as an adult, I didn't feel this way as a kid, but as an adult, I do have this feeling of no soy de aquí ni de allá. And I am still trying to figure out why that happens. I don't always feel like a part of non Latino circles, whether it's within the African American community or a white non Latino community. And sometimes in the Latino community, I don't always feel like I belong 100%. It's kind of a subtle thing. No one's ever excluded me, but there is this sense that I don't always belong. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm a first generation Latina, or it's something. It's not quite clear to me what it is. Sometimes maybe I feel a little self-conscious about my Spanish. I do think my Spanish is pretty good, but I wasn't formally educated in Spanish, and I do kind of have a little, like, I'm self conscious about that. So I kind of feel like maybe it's the language thing that um, makes me not always feel like I belong 100%. So I do feel that it's not necessarily something that others have made me feel. It's something within myself that I don't feel 100% like I belong.
Well, you did mention that people have asked you, like, what are you? How have you grappled with that question? And was it mostly when you were young, or is it now that you are an adult? How do you process that question?
Yeah, I really feel that started as an adult. In Orlando, there is such a huge immigrant population, not just Latino, but growing up, my best friend was Chinese. My other really good friend was Vietnamese, and another good friend of ours is from Trinidad. We were all children of immigrants. It was just a common situation where you would be around people who were not originally from the United States, and or whose family, I should say, was not originally from the United States. So it was a common sense I had that, we're all from everywhere, but we're all together, and that's great. It wasn't until I became an adult where I started feeling like I didn't belong. And it's interesting. But I should say, in terms of the question of what are you, I feel as an adult, I've had to come up with like the elevator speech, the elevator answer. Just say, I'm Afro Latina. My father was Cuban. My mother's Dominican, and just have that answer prepared. As opposed to when I was asked that when I was younger, I'd just be like, I don't know. Like, I don't really know how to answer that. I'm Black, but I'm also this. I'm also Latina. And so I felt as a young person, I didn't quite know how to answer that. But at the same time, I felt like I belonged in my community. It's recently, it's interesting because now as an adult, I know how to answer that question, how are you? But I don't always feel like I belong. So there's this interesting dichotomy happening as a grown up.
Yeah. And you explain it so beautifully through pop-up music school when you introduce yourself. And I think that with you connecting your identity to music and the different sounds of your countries, where your family comes from, I love that is the way that you can incorporate your identity through that medium. So I just wanted to mention that because you do it so beautifully.
Well, thank you so much. You just reminded me of something I've recently was realizing about myself is, my father didn't raise us. After I was 7, I never saw him again. But there was always the sense that I'm half Cuban. My mother always encouraged that. And then when I was very little, we did live in Miami, which has a strong Cuban population. So I always, was familiar with like Cuban foods and, the Cuban accent and Cuban music. But as an adult and actually through pop-up music school, I've been trying to learn more about Cuba through the music in a way that kind of helped me learn more about myself because I didn't have my father around. And I feel like there's this part that is missing in my identity that I wish I knew more about my Cuban identity. And because of the political situation between the United States and Cuba, it's not always the easiest to travel there. I don't have family there anymore. But there is this part of my identity that I feel, I don't know that much about. And whenever I teach about Cuban music with the littles, I really try to take the time and just learn a little more, read a few more articles about the Cuban musicians and the Cuban towns where these musicians are from, to learn a little bit more about myself. So I really feel that sometimes pop-up music school is also a venture in self-discovery for myself and learning more about my own heritage.
Yes. No, I love that. Yeah. And was there kind of like a moment where you reclaimed your Latinidad and African roots? Was it through pop-up music school or what did it happen before?
It actually was through pop-up music school.
Wow.
So I always had a strong sense of who I was as a Latina. And I think because language was always there for me. So Spanish was my first language. I didn't speak English until I started kindergarten. So I always had this strong sense, I'm pura Latina. But I sometimes felt like the African component would get lost. And it was in researching music where I kind of was able to reclaim it. And the music that really hit home for me was the music of this Afro-Venezuelan musician. Her name is Betsaida Machado. She's amazing. I can't say enough about her. Her group is La Parranda El Clavo, and they're from El Clavo in Venezuela. It's a predominantly Black community there, and they celebrate the African roots of Venezuelan music, and they actually recreate some instruments that slaves would use at the time. And I'm just in awe of this group. And in my research of different music, I sometimes would think, in the United States, there's this strong spiritual tradition, like African American spirituals, freedom songs, gospel music. And I'm like, does that exist in Latin America? Why doesn't it? We're descendants of slaves. So many of us, where is this tradition? And with Beitzada's music, I found it. And if it's okay, I want to read some lyrics from one of her songs. Is it okay?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So this particular song, I don't play for my kids because the lyrics are really strong, but I play for my kids. Mayoral, no me pegues, mayoral. En África yo nací, muy chico me secuestraron. Me llegué a esta tierra, fue donde me esclavizaron. Me levanté tempranito para recoger cacao y regreso por la noche con el cuero destrozado por los palos. No me pegues, mayoral. Yo no soy esclavo. Yo quiero mi libertad. So, mayoral, in case the listeners don't know, is overseer. So slave overseers. Don't hit me, overseer.
Wow.
And I played it for my mom, and she's just starting to, crying. And just super powerful. My son actually sings the words, the la letra all the time when I play this, and he just doesn't understand what it's saying. Just the power of those words, really connecting to who we were as slaves, us Afro Latinos. And when I first heard her music, I had to stop. I had to stop what I was doing and just listen because I felt like this is the music of my people. And I tell my kids when we listen to her music, we listen to it all the time. This is the music of your people. They are half Caucasian, and I really want to instill in them that they are descendants of slaves to really connect to their African roots. And her music has touched me so much, Miss Machado's music, that I started changing a little bit of how I dress. So I don't do it that often because I'm a little self-conscious of how I do it, but I wear African headscarves at times. Um, I'm really try to be more intentional to express my pride in my African roots. Her music has just really touched me in a way that I just to this day deeply moved. It's really a profound change in me. And and it all happened because of pop-up music school because I started researching, okay, where do I look for African roots in Venezuelan music? Where do I look for African roots in Colombian music? Because it's all there. When I found her music, it was amazing. It was a profound effect on me.
Yeah, that is awesome. Oh, I am so going to listen to her music. Yeah, and I think it speaks volumes with just like history, right? I think all of us need to be aware, whether if you identify as Afro Latino or not, I think that we all need to be aware of the histories involved because in some way, and I think I listened to this in a podcast episode, or was it through NPR, I believe, but 40% of Latino American descendants come from slaves, like come from Africa. And so I think that even if you think that you don't identify, you never know. You may be a descendant.
100%. I have a friend who's Colombian, and to me, she looks mestiza. She looks like she has European and indigenous roots, but she did her 23andMe, and she's a good chunk of African descent. And I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, that's it just goes to show you the depth of the slave trade. It wasn't just in the United States. It wasn't just in the Caribbean. It was all over.
All over. Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and reading an excerpt from that song. I'm definitely going to listen to it. And so you did mention that your children are half Caucasian, half Afro Latino. So, what is your intention now as a mama raising two children who are now multiracial and multicultural?
So from the very beginning, before I even had kids, I knew I wanted to have them be bilingual. That was the very first step for me. And so when my daughter was born, we did the one parent, one language situation where I only spoke Spanish, my husband only spoke English. And so that was kind of like the base of where I started. And as my kids got older, I realized that that was not enough, that I really had to instill some of the cultural aspects of Latinidad, Afro Latinidad. And so I do that through the music and traditions around the house. So, as I mentioned earlier, just because we're around the Mexican American community, we have adopted that. A lot of Mexican cultural elements in our lives, but in the music as well, I play a lot of Latin music to my kids. So just exposing them to the salsa, the merengue. I try to do it with literature. It actually is kind of an interesting situation I've come across. It is really hard to find literature that was written originally in Spanish. So not just Harry Potter in Spanish, but literature that kids in Latin America read. It's really hard to access that in the States. But I try to do that, get books written originally in Spanish and read it to my kids whenever possible. And, sometimes they groan or, roll their eyes, but I really try to. encourage that.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of raising your children, you did mention earlier in the interview that you were diagnosed with lupus. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that? I feel like oftentimes our community isn't aware about lupus. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your story with that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because it really does affect women of color. And
Mm.
I do think African American and Latino women should really be on the lookout for symptoms. So I first started having symptoms around Christmas time of 2011. So my daughter was like a little over a year and a half. I started having really bad joint pain. I felt like I had done a lot of exercise, even though I hadn't. And I started noticing swelling in my ankles. And my previous work within the rheumatology clinic helped me identify those symptoms as either lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. So here I am, a pretty educated and aware person. I went to a rheumatologist. I explained my concerns, and it still took me 3 months to get the necessary tests to have a formal diagnosis. I went in knowing my symptoms, knew what tests to order, knew what questions to ask, and it still took 3 months. And I ended up in the hospital with a severe kidney flare with a little girl who was about to turn 2. And I am lucky, it's been ups and downs. So I've had periods of flares and periods of remission. And during a period of remission, I was able to have my son, which I'm so grateful
Mm.
for. But during that birth, I had symptoms of a lupus flare that were overlooked. And since my lupus mainly manifests itself in my kidneys, my symptoms at birth looked kind of like preeclampsia, but they were still overlooked. I was not kept in the hospital. I was sent home and had just a really horrible recovery with a newborn. I had to stop nursing almost immediately, and I was put on strong immunosuppressant drugs. And this happened to someone who, I knew what I was going into with a baby.
Mm.
And it still happened to me where I had a really hard period of just unstable kidney disease because of the lupus. I would say I'm still fairly lucky. I have not had kidney failure. My kidneys are still fairly healthy. I did end up having 2 hip replacements because I was on steroids for so many years that it essentially stops the blood flow in your bones, and that causes the bones to deteriorate. So I do have 2 bionic hips, I like to say. But despite that, I would say I'm fairly lucky because I do not need dialysis. I do not need a kidney transplant.
Mm.
But I wish that I could have advocated for myself a little better. And so any any person, male or female, who's having symptoms where they're a little sore or something's not right, their brain is foggy, I would encourage them to go to a doctor right away.
Mhm.
And I would encourage them to see a rheumatologist because a lot of times internists or family practice doctors do not know what to do.
Right.
The rheumatologists are kind of like the mystery solvers of medicine. They really dig deep into these odd symptoms. Anyone going through this, advocate for yourself, come prepared with questions, or bring someone who can advocate for you. If you're just a quieter person, kind of intimidated by doctors, don't go alone. I really feel that that's important for the Latino community. Or if you don't speak English, si no hablan inglés, bring someone to translate,
Mhm.
to be an interpreter in a doctor's visit. I can't say that enough. Too many Latinos, too many people of color in general, we do not get the health care we deserve. And so I can't say that enough. Luckily, my last flare was during the pandemic, and it's been 3 years, and I've in remission since then, and I'm really grateful. But it was really hard because my daughter was really really young. She was barely 2. I had to stop nursing cold turkey, and that was really hard for her. It was hard psychologically and emotionally for her. I think she felt abandoned in some way
Mm.
because she, I try to nurse as long as possible with her, and it just we were in the hospital. I got put on essentially like a chemotherapy drug. And I was like, you can't have my leche anymore. I'm really sorry. And she's doing well. My kids are thriving, but it was a really hard time. She was my first child. It was my first time being a mom, and adding that health component was really difficult. Yeah, anyone going through this, don't be afraid to ask questions. I really feel sometimes when you're in a doctor's office, you're kind of pushed out really quickly because they have their next patient they have to see. You know what? This is your time. Don't be apologetic.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I can't imagine what you went through as a new mom and navigating this new condition. Yeah. And thank you for building this awareness for the community, for those that are listening, because you are so right. I think that oftentimes we are overlooked when it comes to our concerns and our questions. And I think that we need to just like speak up. Otherwise, we can always go with the next practitioner. There's too many fish out in the water. And, that's essentially what we need to look for if in case we don't feel like we are receiving the necessary care and attention we need. Yeah,
Yes, definitely.
for sure. Yeah. And so, as far as with what you're doing now, you have Pop Up Music School, which is growing. Now you have partnered with Luna y Cielo Play in Chicago. Are there any new ventures that you are doing right now?
Yes, it never ends. I think the it's a blessing and a curse to be a creative person, because I always have these ideas and I'm like, okay, I need to table them. I'm going to write them down because I will get to them when I have time. I started selling some educational products online through Teachers Pay Teachers, and I'm hoping to expand that. And I also have an Etsy store that kind of celebrate teachers. So I have different products on a Pop-Up Music School Etsy store. And then also, I had to go back to my idea of patient care. And during the pandemic, I decided to go back to school to become a board certified music therapist.
Mm.
So I definitely plan on continuing teaching, but I also want to add some client care and become a board certified music therapist. And I want to work specifically with kids still. And what I think, my idea may change, but I hope to work in a hospital setting. So assisting kids who are undergoing procedures, whether it's cancer treatment or if they have to have an operation. There are music therapists on staff at Lurie Children's Hospital at Northwestern, University of Chicago, Advocate Hospital in Oak Lawn. And these music therapists have helped children with during their different procedures. So that's my goal, to help in that capacity. And then also, I think being a music therapist will help me in my education, because it will help me be more therapeutically minded when I work with different kids. For example, children who are on the autism spectrum or have some intellectual delay. I want to eventually teach music classes that guarantee that these kids are served well and are set up for success in a music class.
Yes. Oh, wow. I love it. And I wish you the best in your program. And I think that there needs to be more representation through this particular area. I'm not really too familiar with music therapy, but I know that it is growing. And so, yeah, I think that there is a much needed focus, especially within children, because they're not able to express themselves the way that adults do. And so, what other beautiful way to do this kind of therapy through music? And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear more about you and your success in this particular area.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I am going to shift gear towards the Viva la Mami motherhood questions that I ask my guests. What is your meaning of motherhood?
Motherhood for me is being whatever my child needs me to be at that moment. It's important for me to set my ego aside, and that's actually something I've been working on, because it's not natural for me. It's, I can be self-conscious and worry about how do others view me as a mother. And over the years, I've come to realize it doesn't matter what other people think. I need to keep my child and my relationship at the focus. So for me, motherhood is really being attuned to my child, having that be the primary relationship, and really being there for whatever my child needs, even if it may not be what I think they need, and being there 100% to support them and loving them unconditionally, being their support no matter what they need in life. So that's and motherhood is a journey, right? We don't always get it right, but just always trying, right? Always just trying to be there as much as we can. And when we get it wrong, forgiving ourselves, giving ourselves grace, and just jumping back on there. I may have stumbled in this particular moment where my child needed me, but just knowing that, hey, kiddo, I'm jumping right back on. I'm still right there with you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what is one tip of advice you have for Latina mommies?
I think it's important to have a community. I've been very fortunate as the years have gone by. I recently did an event at my local library, the Oak Park Public Library. And I was talking to the librarian there, Nora Sanchez, who's amazing. But I was just telling her how important this library has been for me as a mom. We've gone to countless story times. There were a lot of Spanish-speaking moms, and they did a bilingual story time that I was a part of for a while. And I just got to meet these amazing moms who have the same mission as I do. And it was such a gift for me. And looking back now that my kids are a little older and I'm still teaching the littles, I'm looking back and thinking, wow, how lucky was I to have these moms in my corner, this library in my corner with these wonderful librarians that were just so instrumental in who I was as a mom, who helped support my mission. So my number one recommendation is to really seek out your community. It's there. Don't be scared. We're out there for you. There's wonderful people. And then, you've mentioned Luna y Cielo a couple of times. She's such a great resource, Vanessa. And she has that same mission in mind. There are people, mothers, fathers, or other just adults in the community who are there to support you. We're out there. So look out for a community that will support you.
Yes, I love this. Yes. Well, Magaly, where can people follow you?
I am on Facebook and on Instagram. I'm a Pop-Up Music School OP, I believe, on Instagram. And I also have my website, popupmusicschool.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm trying to get more out there on social media, but Facebook and Instagram are my main go-tos.
Great. I'll make sure to share the specific links in the show notes. But Magaly, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you being here and just sharing who you are as well, because I think that representation matters regardless. If we speak Spanish, that is the one thing that we all have in common. But I think that our stories and our identities as different individuals is what really matters. And it is what creates a specific picture about us and representation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for tuning in to the Viva la Mami podcast. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a review and write what episode really resonated with you. If you really loved it, share it on social media or with an amiga. As always, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening. Make sure to follow me at Viva la Mami on Instagram or visit vivalamami.com. Please note the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be replaced by your healthcare provider nor taken as professional advice.